which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Budget Committee Member George Fisher.
Present.
Budget Committee Member Laura Fisher. Here. Budget Committee Member Lance Masters.
He was just here.
Yeah, he was here, but he went to go get his packet. Budget Committee Member Tiffany Pruitt. Here. Budget Committee Member Tom Crandall.
Here.
Budget Committee Member Sandra Kelly. Here. Budget Committee Member Kevin Benson.
Here.
Budget Committee Member Eva Zerfing. She'll be late.
She did say she would be here after 8 o'clock. She has to work until 8. So.
Budget Committee Member Darlene Solinger. Here. Budget Committee Member Shauna Hazel. Here. Budget Committee Member Karen Seid. Here. Budget Committee Member Guida Hake. Here. Budget Committee Member Bobby Walker. Budget Committee Member Don Hake.
Here.
Thank you.
It's time to approve the minutes, and we have minutes for both May 25th and June 1st. Has everybody had a chance to read those, and does anybody have any issues with them? Darlene?
On page 1 of June 1st, it says under roll call, Brazil Masters.
That's the baby. Her name was on the audience sign-in sheet at Lance's daughter.
I didn't see, I don't know if they've seen them.
I did want to ask, there are 2 sets of minutes from June 1st. What was that about?
Yeah,
There are.
yeah, I have several different pages that.
And Bobby and Lance are both here
Turn
now.
that page over. Yeah. Looks the same. Oh, my goodness. Page
I'm sorry.
4, 5,
And a
5,
rush ticket in the
7.
mail. I apologize.
So which set is the set that, I mean, I had an extra 3 pages, I guess, not 2 extra sets, and they were
The
kind of in
pages
a
are
different format.
7 minutes long. And they're not, are you saying they're not identical?
No, they're not identical. They're on different pages at least, you know. I mean, maybe the minutes are probably identical, but the page format is not the same. So I guess it doesn't matter either one, as long as you find page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, correct?
Right, they're numbered, so
Okay.
I apologize.
That's okay. Darlene, I'm sorry for interrupting you about the May 25th.
I wasn't here May 25th.
Right. Weren't we doing the May 25th one first?
She was making
I was
corrections
just
to the
making a comment on
Oh.
June 1st.
Okay.
I wasn't here on May 25th.
I had something for the May 25th minutes, and that is on page 8 and 9, I believe. Now I lost it. But it is where I say that I didn't think that was a justifiable expense, and it's out of context. It says that after a discussion about the training, and it's what I said is I thought that $1,000 budgeted for lodging and meals for a conference that took place in Portland was not a, and so that is quite a difference in the way that reads, and I would appreciate if that were corrected. Anything else for the minutes for May 25th? Laura?
On page 1, the second to the last paragraph. Oh, no, sorry. 3, under loans discussion, in the middle, says DCM Laura Fisher, so the blog talks about ordinance 123 and citizens can get bank statements and council's blah, blah, blah. I didn't say citizens can get bank statements. I said something to the effect of that citizens believe council should be privy to ordinance 123.
Where are you?
Page 10,
Uh-huh.
top paragraph. Instead of 1, 2, 3, it says motion.
Oh, motion.
Right, and it says it was seconded by DCM Laura Fisher. I don't think I did. I did the
George
next one.
Fisher, it says.
No, it says Laura.
Maybe it was George.
Mine says George.
Mine says Laura.
It's the third paragraph down.
Yeah.
Mine says Laura.
Mine
It's
says
just
Laura.
motion is the only thing in the paragraph.
Right.
Yeah. And I had it in my
Oh, okay.
handwritten notes that it was seconded by Laura, but I may have misheard over there.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
what
the only reason I know it is because the first one I did, that ever made a second on anything was when we sent it to Andy.
So with those three corrections, should we table them for the corrections? Or should we
Madam
just,
Chair, we really should listen to the tape and make the corrections.
and then bring them back for the next meeting?
If I may
Okay,
ask.
okay. So, if it's acceptable to the committee, we'll table those minutes until those corrections are made. And now for the minutes of June 1st, any corrections there? Okay, everybody, would somebody like to make a motion to accept these minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of June 1st, 2011.
Second?
Second.
Everybody in favor of approval of the minutes of June 1st, 2011, please say yes.
Yes.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, those minutes are accepted. And we received a lot of information on our tables when we were out here today. And some of it was requested, but it wasn't in our packet, and so this is the first we've seen it. And these are the funds that we're going to be discussing tonight. So I personally would appreciate a 10-minute break, so we had a chance at least to skim the information that we, see if we can formulate any, perhaps if Rich wants to walk us through the changes that he's proposing,
Sure.
that would be the way to handle it.
Okay,
Okay,
want to start?
sure.
Okay, we're going to start with the fire fund, EMS. I'd like Jeff to give a staff report that he has provided, and then I'll walk you through the changes, and he'll be here to answer any questions. So go ahead, Jeff.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. The staff report that you have before you basically speaks to the proposed budget. After some careful reviewing from Mr. Carson, myself, and the mayor, we've taken into consideration a lot of the recommendations and things that we've been seeing over the last few weeks and made some adjustments to accurately reflect what we think we need to do for this next year's budget for emergency services. A lot of the things that you see in the budget, when you go line item by line item, are pretty specific to the department in terms of how we operate, and the staff report reflects that. A lot of what we are dictated to do is things by OSHA, NFPA, and having medical devices. Those devices have to be tested and maintained. You know, when you're getting ready to shock somebody, you want to make sure you're giving them the right electricity. So that's what a lot of that stuff is for. We've cut just about everything out that we can, and one of the biggest areas that we've made a cut to, or I should say the only place you can really make cuts outside of the operations of the department is in personnel expense. And if you look at the new budget worksheet, you'll see off on the far right-hand corner the changes made. First thing I did is I reduced my salary by $4,500, and that gave saved the budget about $6,387 when you factor in the benefits like health insurance, PERS, things like that. We reduced some other line items throughout the budget worksheet, but everything is basically at a level that can't really be reduced. The budget that we are reflecting here is a balanced budget, assuming we do bring in all of our revenues, and our revenues that we have projected for the next fiscal year are based on the amount of revenue we've brought in over the last 3 years. Some of the more important things to identify to the budget committee and the council is that we don't really have any big projects that we have to fulfill. So we've taken expenses out in capital outlay, just about everything with the exception of tires. And we have to replace tires this year on the ambulance, specifically the studded tires for the winter time. The ones we had last year, they're literally on their last legs. Outside of that, we're working every day to figure out ways to cut costs. I identified that in the staff report where we're doing group purchasing, we're utilizing things like GSA purchasing, which is government purchasing. It allows us to buy off the federal contract instead of paying a premium price when we go to certain vendors. And of course, being very careful with our inventories. When we deal with purchasing medical supplies, if you buy in bulk, you usually end up paying a lot of money for medications that you're just going to end up throwing away because they do have expiration dates, and you have to keep the medications going with the expiration date. So we stay on that pretty sharply and only order when we need to, and we keep a very low backstock so we don't end up throwing away a lot of our inventory. That's pretty much all I have to report. I guess when it's time for questions, I'll be ready to answer those.
Thanks.
Could you tell me what the line item for Contract Service Volunteer Association is?
Absolutely. Most volunteer departments in Hood River County and around the area have some sort of what they call a LoSAP program, Length of Service Award program. The city of Cascade Locks, years ago, before I even got here, decided not to do a LoSAP program, and they wanted to give a certain amount of funds to the volunteer association, to the volunteers, so that they could do whatever they want with. Previous to this, the city used to pay volunteers, and unfortunately, what you run into trouble with when you're paying volunteers is that you have to pay taxes, and if somebody gets hurt or goes on unemployment, then the city is on the hook for those volunteers, even though technically they're not really a full-time employee. They have to claim the city as an employer. So to get away from having to deal with all those issues, the recommendation was made several years ago, again, before I got here, to the council to do a contract with the volunteer association to kind of come up with a way of compensating the volunteers so they could do their own length of service award program, or they could do whatever they wanted with those funds.
How are those funds, how were they expended last year? I mean, how do you designate them?
You mean through the volunteers?
Yeah.
They do it through their association. So
Okay,
they're a
okay.
501(c), and they have meetings, and they do minutes, and they have a budget too, just like us.
Darlene?
So are you saying that there's no workman's comp paid for volunteers?
Oh, no.
in the city?
No. By law, we have to do workman's comp, absolutely.
And where is that reflected in here?
The workman's comp is, it's under insurance in materials and services. And you should see,
$20,000?
yes, ma'am.
Is that all workman's comp?
No, there's workman's comp, and then we pay a secondary insurance for the volunteers as an added benefit of being a volunteer through the volunteer fire insurance services. And basically, because firefighters, by the type of work that they do, if something happens to them, like let's say they get killed, the city has to pay out $10,000. So with VFIS, we pay out an additional $20,000. And there's other benefits too, like if a volunteer is out at the coast and they cut their hand off, VFIS will compensate them for cutting their hand off, even though it wasn't directly related to the city. They cover a whole wide area of things, and again, it's a benefit to our volunteers for being on the department. And I think that cost is something like $5,000 a year, give or take. I can't remember the exact amount. other little thing, the BFIS, one of the big benefits of being a member with them is that they have training that we get free of charge because we're a member with them. So things like the driver training program, different types of safety things like highway safety, they give us the curriculum that would normally cost, hundreds of dollars in order for us to have that. We get that because we have insurance through them.
So are we asking questions on the line item budget?
If you're curious, any question you want to address to Jeff, I think this would be an appropriate time.
So I thought Rich was gonna, were you gonna give a report?
I would have preferred a report,
Well,
you
why
know,
don't I-
before a lot of discussion.
Why don't I go ahead and do that?
Okay.
Okay.
And questions about other funds other than just Jeff's as well. And so, sorry Jeff, that was probably a little premature. That's okay.
I'm going to talk off the latest worksheet, which is dated 6/8/2011. That has the most recent changes. And what prompted the changes is I included a memo that I reduced the fire ambulance service fees from $160,000 to $126,000. My concern is that the fees tend to go up and down. That it's not like a utility rate where it's pretty stable. And I decided it would be better to kind of budget for a more conservative, lower number, because we don't really know what's going to come in. And that the 126 is basically the average of the last 3 to 4 years. So on the right side, under revenues, you see a reduction of $34,000 in the fund. To make up for that, going down, under personnel expenses, I shouldn't say we, Jeff volunteered this, it wasn't even my suggestion, so. Took out $4,500 with the benefits that are worked into that. It comes out that we reduced it by $63.87. On the next page, 2, there's a series of changes in terms of M&S that you can see. The biggest one is at the bottom, $10,880 in uncollectible accounts. When you reduce the revenue, you reduce the number of uncollectibles because it's a ratio. So we able to reduce 10,880. Then there's some smaller ones. Page after that, on page 3, under total interfund transfers, we reduced it by 12,710 because basically originally we were funding the debt out of the out of EMS, but we ended up doing it out of the general fund. So this goes away. And it's still being paid, but it's a bigger number and it's over in the general fund.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I thought we established that, correct me if I'm wrong, the committee would not remember, that although the firehouse is accepted by, the city as a city debt, that the fire truck is a fire department, is something that is normally saved for out of the fire department, and that loan should be serviced by the fire department. That was my understanding. Am I incorrect?
I basically go in by what the city council adopted in terms of how it was structured, and it was the payment from the general fund. So
Is that what it said?
yeah, that's what it is.
Is that the way you understand it, Kevin and Tom?
Yeah. Okay, and on the last page, let's see.
Well,
Yeah.
I will just clarify that, is that's what we said we were doing, we were trying to find monies. I don't know if we've gotten all the monies to cover that, yeah, but that's what we were attempting to do, is cover that debt.
It says in the
But not sure whether
resolution,
we got all the money yet to cover it though.
it says in the resolution, that that's to be paid for by the general fund? Or just to be paid for?
I'd have to check the resolution. The source of the funding is the general fund. Now, whether it necessarily has to come out of the EMS or come out of the general fund itself, I don't, I'd have to go back and read it, but that's the source of the money. And on the last page, there's several minor ones, but in any case, it now balances out to $238,860. So if you have any questions on the individual line items,
Darlene had a question.
Well, this is the OYB loan, wasn't that already, that was already established? You're not talking about the 450 and the 24,000 loan, right?
The
The
24,000.
OYB, so I'd like to look at that resolution because I like to see where, I also think it's, fire hall expense should be kept in the fire hall. The
And that
general
is
fund was being hit with the 450 and the
Exactly.
24,000.
That was my
The OYB
understanding.
loan was already established.
This isn't the fire truck, this is,
The 24,000
Yes.
is the
This is
fire.
150.
yeah, this 12,000 isn't for the fire
150.
truck, it's for that OLD line,
It's
which is
150
different.
for fire hall and 125, I think, for the fire truck or vice versa. That was already.
these were interest-only payments on the fire station and the truck. I mean, that's what basically it says.
Mary Ann.
Mary Ann.
The 150 and 125, excuse me, that Darlene is talking about is the OIB loan, and that is funded out of the general fund and has been for the last couple of
And
years.
that's the fire truck?
That's the fire hall.
Oh.
The fire truck is the 24,280.
Water.
And it was my understanding that that resolution came before council and the general fund was going to pay for that, so that's where it's at.
So a couple questions. I don't see a beginning balance for the following budget year, and I don't see any way where we're addressing the current negative cash balance of $60,000. So that's, what, about $100,000 that we're not talking about right here.
In
I
terms of,
am still under the impression too, I mean, I never dreamed really that the fire truck, that we were talking in terms of the fire truck being financed out of the general fund. That is a fire department, something that needs to be budgeted for and saved for, and that's something that needs to be paid back by them. And I see Jeff shaking his head yes, and I appreciate that very much.
what, in terms of this year's ending balance, or fund balance, what has to be done, if it's negative, the city is required to make a loan to itself to pay for it before the end of June. So if there's going to be a negative balance, I'm going to have to bring it back to the council on June 27th to make a loan to pay for it. That's budget law. Last time we showed it as a deficit, and the auditor dinged us on that and said, no, you can't do that. So in terms of what the number is, we are, we're talking today with the building service to get the final, to come up with a final estimate. So I don't have that number. It's less than 60, but I don't know what it is yet.
You're saying that a negative balance has to be made up by the other funds because, no, you can't do that, you can't leave it in the negative.
Correct.
In fact, you can leave it in the negative if you have to leave it in the negative. We discussed that at our seminar at the Department of Revenue. It's a ding, yes, but I'm not in favor of robbing all of our utility funds in order to make up for a ding that deserves to be there. And you can't take out of all the other departments to make up for this department
I'm not,
time and again.
I'm going by what the city auditor said. The city auditor said you cannot do that. He said it in his audit, that you cannot run a negative and that it has to be paid for. What I'm saying is that his instruction was we would have to make a loan from another fund to cover it. It wouldn't be a gift, or it wouldn't be paying it. It would have to be a loan to cover it, and we have to do it before the end of the month.
Okay, but irregardless of whether, I mean, that's just an accounting thing,
Mhm.
because you can make a loan for 2 days
Sure.
to get to the new budget, and then, but then suddenly that debt just disappears off of this budget.
No?
Well, I mean, it's not addressed on here.
Well, like I said, I'm trying to get an estimate as close as I can to give you the final number. If it's a deficit, and I'll tell you as close as I can what it'll be, and we'll have to budget for it.
Okay, well then that's what I'm saying, is this is being proposed as a balanced budget, but it's not. It doesn't address
Yeah,
the $50,000 or $60,000 that we currently have a negative cash balance
or
on.
less.
Or more.
I mean, yeah.
I don't
It's-
I don't think it could be more, but go ahead.
Nor are we addressing the fact that city policy is that funds have a positive beginning balance that covers the first quarter of their operation. That's city policy. So there's two things that this budget, proposed budget, doesn't include, and it is between $70,000 and $100,000. That's not addressed in this proposal.
I'm not aware that there's a city policy that you needed a big enough beginning balance to cover the first quarter.
There's a state law that says that you can't spend it until you get it. That's state law, and
Okay.
that is a city policy, and it's in the form of a resolution or an
Okay.
ordinance. And according to budget law, is what you're supposed to do when you think that your receipts for that year aren't anticipated to be received in that year, you cannot budget against them. You have to use that as your beginning balance to fund the first part of your next year. You cannot spend money until you get it. End of story. You're violating an Oregon state statute and violating a resolution and an ordinance. And each year, at the end, it's made up for, but it hasn't happened in the form of a loan that's been paid back. It's just been taken out of our utilities to make up, and then we do the same thing the next year and the next year and the next year. It's not legal to do so. And so, we can't do that this year. I don't think other funds should make up for that again. If you say that there's going to be a loan, then it needs to be reflected in this balanced budget. Kevin?
Additionally to what we talked about before, this kind of establishes a practice where a department head can basically write their own budget simply by spending. You know, we supported this fund, the city did, 100% over the last 3 budget cycles. 78,000. It's a percentage of the property tax that's collected. This fund knew exactly how much support it was going to get from the city, but has continued to overspend. A year ago, this fund was $32,000 in the negative. Nothing's happened to correct that. Here we are 12 months later, $60,000 in the negative. Nothing's done to take care of that. Well, are we just going to let all of the department heads spend whatever they want to spend? And thereby establish that other departments have to come and rescue? I mean, can streets go out and pave all the streets in town and just expect that we're going to cover it? And the other thing is, are we going to come back here next year for the budget and find this fund $60,000 in debt again?
And that was part of the reason I dropped the revenue as much as I did, because I couldn't count on that much money coming in.
But the revenues aren't the problem. It's the expense, it's the spending that's the problem. I mean, this fund knows how much money it's going to get from the city, $76,000. And if you spend more than $76,000 before you have revenues to cover it, you know that you're violating city policy and state budget law. But nothing's taken place over the last 3 budget cycles to address that. And I'm not pointing my finger at you, don't get me wrong. I just don't see any way how this addresses the root of the problem, or even addresses the actual problem, which is whatever, $70,000, $100,000 in misappropriated money.
I have a question. Why isn't this fund charged for audit like every other department, including tourism, everything? Every fund has an audit charge with this one.
There is.
Or is it?
Page 17 in our budget.
Well, where is it reflected in this fund?
Page 4,
Page 4.
under materials and services.
Okay, thank you. I missed it.
Oh, no, I right, that's
I-
$250.
Yeah, right.
And how much does tourism pay for their audit? It's $800 or something?
$637.
637. Okay, well, that's an interesting split, I'll just say that much. Don,
Does, we're, at this point, we're assuming this deficit of 60,000 and something. Does that include spending that we've had since this date, that's normal expenses, expenditures that have been going out, or do we have an idea of what's been spent?
It'll be a combination of expenditures and revenues.
So this isn't based on what we're anticipating from ambulance fees then?
Yeah, it's anticipating the ambulance fee revenues in terms of billings. And, you know, so I'm gonna have to come up with an estimate.
But we should know what we've,
As opposed,
what we've written checks for, that's what I'm getting at.
yeah, well, we'll know through May.
well, let me just ask you, if you use this money that you're expecting to come in for billing to handle this deficit that this fund is gonna go into this department's gonna go into the next year with, what's going to pay for the salaries, et cetera? I mean, are they going to expend all of the city contribution immediately? Is that, I mean, what's gonna keep them going for the first couple of months if they have no anticipated revenues other than, you know, a portion of the city? Or did they get the entire $70-some thousand in January, or I mean in July?
I would assume it's property taxes, that would be there. I mean, yeah, I mean,
And
the ambulance service fees will accumulate, but that won't be there up front.
And I have another question about, okay, Kevin.
Well, we don't receive the property tax revenue until September?
Mary Ann?
I get sometimes monthly checks or monthly distribution from the county. Our biggest hit comes November 15th, after that, and then we get another hit May 15th as the quarters, people pay. But there are times where I do get checks every month for them, or every other month.
But not anything significant? A couple
$1,000, $2,000,
Yeah, which would be divided equally among all the funds, right?
Between the general fund and EMS, not all the funds.
45 to EMS.
Yeah.
I've had some questions about how it is that this department is allowed to continue spending when it doesn't have any money. For instance, there's been some expensive purchases lately, or correct? Like the repair on the vehicle for the fire chief, wasn't there an expensive
Well, if it's anything,
repair?
anything that's over 2,500 has to go to the council.
Yeah, right.
And, well, it shouldn't have to go to council in order not to be done illegally, and if you don't have the money, you can't spend it. And so how is that done?
Now, I'm just saying that if it is over 2,500, it's a requirement to go to council, that's all.
Darlene?
Doesn't somebody look at balances of funds before they write the check to see if there's money in the account, especially when you give us a paper that says there's 60,000 in a negative? And I just wanted to say what Sandra and Kevin were saying, you can also look up in the auditor's report where it says emergency services fund, each year there's been an excess of expenditures over revenues. In 2010, fund deficit, which is violation of Oregon local budget law. And it also says in the general fund, under the auditor's report, that fund balance has been declining. This results primarily from transfers out to other funds. And we can see that those transfers are to pay expenditures that year after year, more expenditures than revenues. And if the 126,000 big revenues isn't an actual assessment, you added an extra 10% on it, so it's more like 114, 115. And some of these people responsible. You're writing checks, you're spending the city's money, but there's no money in that fund, so who's gonna pay for it? Okay, we're gonna get another report in another month that says we're, 70 or 80,000 in debt.
I just don't understand why the checks keep getting written when there's no money. We all know that.
Well, it's illegal.
Does the charter or the rules, ORS, what is the remedy? When a municipality finds itself in this kind of predicament, what is the remedy?
To correct it so it never happens again, so it's not given the opportunity to happen again. Because you're violating both the Oregon state statutes and the ordinances. I don't know whether it's an ordinance or a resolution made by the city regarding the proper handling of money.
So then we're just supposed to shut down the fund? I mean, how do you do that?
That's what we're here trying to figure out, Laura. I don't know. Personally.
Well, I will look into the revenues and expenditures. I guess the real question is, how do you want to address it through the budget?
The,
Can't pay any more
the
bills.
negative cash balance?
Can't pay bills.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm talking about
You have to cut
next year's
expenditures. So
budget.
you look
Chair.
at the expenditures.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, George.
Well, I guess I got a question. I mean, if you go back through and you average out what the revenues were, you can come up with a solid figure, okay? But on the same premise, if you go back and you look at the debt that the emergency services is in, if last year they were in $32,000 of debt for 1 year, and that now this year, it'd be reasonable to assume that they went into that much debt last year, that they're gonna go into approximately that much debt this year, that they're gonna be between $60,000 and $64,000 in debt this year. I mean, if you're gonna use that premise of going back and evaluating from the last years. And, you know, and this year, we had even more service debt because we had EMTs that were hired, that we had to pay insurance and we had to pay their benefits as well. So I don't see this number really changing very substantially. You know, it could change by a few dollars, but it kind of stands to reason. If they went into that much debt last year, it looks like they're going to go into that much, almost that much debt again this year. Because you have revenues that come in, you have revenues that go out. So I don't really see that particular line item changing. And furthermore, if you take out a loan to pay that off, then there's another debt that hasn't been addressed on this balance sheet, as well as, I don't see the other debts on here that are supposed to be on this balance sheet, as far as what that monthly payment is. Am I missing that?
What other debts are you
For the
talking
fire
about?
station?
For the fire truck?
Those
Or is
debts,
that out of the general fund?
those debts have not occurred as of that date, George. Those are financial statements as of April 31st. Those debts will not be reflected until July 1st on my
All right.
cash balance.
So is it in this proposed budget worksheet?
Not out of the fire department, in the general fund.
So it's out of the general fund on
Yes.
this?
And
All
that's
right.
the second part of
For the fire truck
our
as
meeting.
well.
Yes, yes.
For the fire truck as well, all right.
I mean, one way that we've tried to address this is to reduce revenues and expenditures, because they weren't that realistic, and we've gone from, you know, 338,000 down to 238,000. So we've reduced the fund by about 30% from last year. And it's lower than the previous, in fact, it's lower than the previous 3 years in terms of revenues and expenditures. I understand the issue in terms of spending and revenues, and, you know, I'm trying to deal with that. But what I need to do is deal with it in next year's budget. That's what we're here for. So I guess I'm open to any suggestions that you have.
Evan?
I just can't see approving the practice of an individual spending public funds without approval. And that's what's happened here. If you spend more than you have in your fund, you're spending money from other funds. We have, the city policy is you can't spend money out of your fund unless the funds are actually there, whether it's been budgeted for or not.
And how do you?
This fund is responsible for the money that it's spent in excess of its revenues. It's 100% responsible for it.
And I agree with that.
And it's gotta be addressed next year, in my opinion.
And
The
my
amount,
question, yes, and the question is how?
by reducing the expenditures by the amount that it's over its cash balances.
So would you deal with that by putting, let's say the numbers is like it was last year, by the time we get down to it, let's say it's $32,000. Would you put $32,000 in contingency to
In
cover it?
contingency?
Yeah.
Negative 32,000?
No, you said take it
Can't
out of,
do that.
take it out of expenditures.
You're saying that you're gonna have to borrow the money to meet budget law?
I'm saying that in this current I'm not talking about, I don't want to be in a position to borrow money next year as part of this. That's what I'm trying to get at. Yes, if we're running negative, my understanding, at least with the audit for this current year, and that's not what the budget is here for, it's the current year, I'm told I'm going to have to borrow money to pay the deficit because I can't have a deficit. Okay. Next year, the question is, how do you deal with that issue? How do you make sure it doesn't happen?
Where
Okay,
is
that's-
borrowing that money
That's a policy
reflected?
thing. What I'm saying is that money is not reflected in your revenues and expenses.
Right.
It needs to be reflected in your expense column, and there needs to be a beginning balance as well, because the policy is that you can't spend out of an empty fund. So if we get to the end of this budget cycle, and then the next budget cycle, and this fund is down to zero, for the first quarter, they're not gonna have any money to spend. That has to be addressed.
Okay, I'm not aware of any, and that doesn't mean anything at this point. I'm not aware of a city council policy that says you have to have a beginning balance to cover the first quarter expenses.
We have a policy that says you can't spend out of an empty fund. Okay, and if there's no beginning balance on July 1st, that fund is empty for the first quarter until the tax revenues come in. So that fund wouldn't have any money to spend for that entire quarter. Maybe a couple $1,000 if somebody pays late or pays early or whatever. But it would have no significant means of supporting itself. for
I don't
the
know how
first
much,
quarter.
I don't know how much money we have on hand in terms of property taxes.
Mary Ann just stated that she gets, the county sends her check or payments every once in a while through the year. But the majority of the payments come in September and in May.
I understand that.
Don?
I don't see how we can make any, we're guessing now on how much we're gonna get from ambulance revenue. I assume we're guessing. And we don't know how much we've written checks for. So how do we even know this figure? How can we sit and make it, maybe we've got extra money, I don't know. But
Well,
we're,
let's
but we're
start
going from a negative figure, we think, of 60,000 something. We know we've written checks in the last few months. How do we know these things? I think we have to have something on paper. Everything we're guessing at. We're getting into another meeting where we're gonna have a guessing contest.
Well, we don't have much more time. We don't have any time for guessing at this point. Tiffany?
Marianne, I'm looking at the resolutions that are proposed in our council packets for Monday, and it doesn't specifically state where the money is to come from, so it just says the city shall repay, so is that an assumption that the debt's gonna come from the general fund?
That's what I was told to prepare the general fund for.
It doesn't say that?
It does not say, it says the city shall repay the electric portion of the capital reserve fund in the amount of $450,000 without interest for the time of the loan, Nothing in the resolution prevents the city from repaying any portion of it earlier. It doesn't say specifically where the money's coming from.
I'm opposed to the general fund paying for the fire truck. That needs to be in this department.
Oh, it's his. It's yours.
Mine? This is
Can I
mine.
say one thing? I've
No,
always
sorry,
watched them
I'm
all.
sorry.
and I
Sorry, this,
speak
You're out of order.
louder for
I'm
people
sorry.
at home.
I'm sorry, there's no public comment at this
Well,
meeting.
she was asking us to speak louder,
Speak
I
louder
think.
into your
and,
microphone, that's all I'm asking, thank you.
It's our system, actually. You can turn that thing up, and if you change channels by mistake, it'll blast
I
you
can
out.
always hear you, Sandra, but people like that,
Okay.
mentioning that, thank you.
Okay. Any more, there's more discussion, I assume, and so let's continue. Rich?
Well, I think the only source of funds we have is general fund money. Now, whether you want it paid out of here, if you want it paid out of this fund or out of the general fund, it's up to you.
What are you talking about?
The
Property
fire
taxes.
Oh,
And the fire truck, yeah, not the,
have we gotten to the resolution on the negative cash balance yet? Or are we,
Yeah, I don't know that we have.
this is your second to the last council meeting coming up before the budget is accepted. And so I assume you're going to be asked to make these transfers on the same night that you pass this budget.
irregardless, those transfers have to be addressed in this fund? Because even if it's a transfer, it's gonna transfer back to here.
And you know about it, which legally mandates you to address it. Darlene?
And so we've been going through the budget, reducing everywhere we can to pay for the $450,000 fire hall debt and the $24,000 debt that has been ignored for the last 3 years. And now we're going to go back and borrow again another $60,000 to make this solvent, is that what you're saying? So,
Well-
we're gonna make another city loan to fire to make this solvent?
I'll take suggestions if
I
anybody
say
has.
take 60 out of this fund,
And how do you do that?
reduce expenditures,
And how do you do that? That's
wherever they're at. Personnel will be the only one, we've already cut all of the materials and services down to,
Without personnel, you have to cut your revenues. The revenues don't stay if there is no personnel to bring it in. That is one thing. The $126,000 that's budgeted, personnel has to be in place in order to bring that in.
so we're 10% over there, that we can reduce 10% from the 126. The Multnomah County contract, has that already been established for next budget year?
We get money from Multnomah County.
We get a reimbursement, right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You just have monthly or quarterly?
I think what you meant is that contract gonna be current again next year, because there's, what is it, Warrendale, Corbett's doing a new fire district thing? Do we know whether or not that's even gonna be a valid contract?
Let's ask Jeff, okay?
Okay.
There is going to be no fire district for Dodson Warrendale. They decided not to move forward with that. So yes, the contract for $20,000 is still going to be valid.
Bobby?
A question for Chief Richard.
Sure.
Jeff, you still got a couple weeks left in the fiscal year, okay? And I know we have billing, we have outstanding. Is the money coming in, are we done with it so far as this fiscal year, or are we expecting
Part of the problem
revenues,
is
or?
the June revenue shows up on the 1st of July. And, historically, we don't
Right.
post back. But yes, revenue's always coming in. I think the last check we got was for $11,000. So yeah, we're always getting revenue. It just doesn't come when we want it to. It's not like, as everybody knows,
Right.
it's not like the light bills or.
But you made some major, I guess our interpretation of major, I caught $1,200 major when you have no money. And so, things that absolutely had to be done now? Or did you do that because you got $11,000 more in revenue?
I don't understand the question.
Well, didn't you have the command vehicle repaired here just recently?
Actually, that repair happened early in the spring, and we somehow missed that bill, and they called us up and said, hey, we haven't received payment on that, so we went ahead and paid that bill. So that repair did not happen recently. About 2 months ago, or a month ago, we had to repair one of our fire engines because it wouldn't start. And then the other one had, it was leaking oil all over the place. So, I mean, those are, you could say don't spend money, but, I mean, if I don't spend money, then the fire engines don't roll. So we've been sticking just to the bare bone minimum of expenses.
What other expenses have you had recently? Like in the last couple of weeks, 3 or 4 weeks?
Unless you're thinking of something specific, I mean, there's just our normal type of expenses that we have, utilities, telephone, medical supplies.
Shauna?
Mr. Carson, other fire departments probably deal with the same kind of issues with only receiving property tax money and contracts, service contracts, et cetera. What do they do to make up for this deficit? Just because I don't think we're the only one that has to go through this. I think that fire and EMS are limited in where they get their revenues, but certainly there are other paid fire positions out there and other successful departments that are managing.
Well, I think first of all, you have to understand that and agree to what your minimum level of service is. In other words, at what point can you not reduce anything? Okay. And at that point, you would have to probably increase your general fund contribution, because that's really the only valve, if you want to call it that you can use.
Or try to find other sources of revenue.
Yeah, but I mean, pretty much the revenues that are here are here. I mean, there's nothing else out there that you can use. I mean, there's a lot of different financing structures, and one of the things I'm recommending to the city council is they really need to look at all the available options out there. Whether you join with another fire department to cut administrative costs, whether you create a fire district, you really need to look at all the possible financing options out there. But at some point, you reach a minimum level of service you really can't go below. It isn't like, it's like the ordinance enforcement officer. You can eliminate that position and the weeds will get taller and you'll have more abandoned vehicles, but you can't do that with EMS. And at some point, you got to say, we've got to provide this level of service to help people.
Do you think this is the bottom line then?
Well, I'm not an expert, and I've worked with a company who has experts in this when I'm asked, and I'm not one of them. Okay, what I'm saying is, we need to bring in some people to do both a financial and a performance audit of the organization to figure out what is the best, is this the minimum level of service or not, and how would you pay for it?
I have a question in regards to the billing for the ambulance. This Springfield service that was helping you on this, is this, do they have a base, this $4,000, what is this exactly?
It's a great question. They charge us by each bill that we send out. And I think the current rate is it's like $38 or $39 per bill. So every time I send a bill to them, we get charged $38. So if we see an increase in calls, then you'll see more charges to that account. So that $4,000 is taking into account the amount of calls that we generally send in for bills.
Okay, and so these bills are sent to Springfield on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis? So we can accumulate in a timely manner the money that's owed us. And what percentage also do we have in uncollectible bills? Can you give, one question at a time.
I'll try and take a stab questions, you can lead me on if I'm missing something. I try to stick to weekly billings with Springfield, but as it says, time is available. You know, I'm only allowed to work 40 hours a week. So sometimes I can get to it, sometimes I can't. It just depends on what's going on during the work week. In terms of the uncollectibles, generally, well, there's two types of revenue. There's guaranteed revenue, which is if somebody has health insurance, usually it's a full payer, or there's the Medicare and Medicaid. And somebody who has Medicare and Medicaid, they're technically a full payer because we have a contract with, the government, and the government says, we're only gonna give you X amount, and they pay in full. The hard thing when it comes to ambulance accounting is the disparity between what we send out as an average bill and what we're allowed to bill. So when people look at ambulance revenue, it's confusing because it shows that, you billed out X amount, but in actuality, you're only allowed to bill a certain amount. Of that certain amount that we can bill, we usually see about 70% of that. If you're looking at the big number of everything that we can bill for, we usually get about 65% of that. It just depends on what category the bill falls into. I mean, it's kind of complex. I'd have to show you on.
For budget purposes, we use 32% uncollectible.
Okay, that's why the next question was actually, it's not a true figure in receiving money, the original billing, you get less.
Right.
And that's the amount that should reflect in accounts receivable. And is it correct? Is that what you show?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look back at the history, it's pretty accurate.
Thank you.
Bobby, did you have another question?
Jeff, with billing, it's time consuming, I understand that. So if, I notice here that we cut overtime completely. As of 1st of January, it was a little under $9,000. In the proposed budget, there's nothing. And so I don't know that, I don't know what the solution is. Is the expectation for the fire chief to do the billing and be the fire chief in 40 hours an unreasonable expectation? And I think the council needs to look at that. Because if we're going to cut time with any employee, we have to look at job duties and what we can get done in that amount of time. So if it takes an employee 40 hours to sweep all the streets, but then we tell that same employee, not only do you gotta sweep the streets, you gotta do all the paperwork, then is that reasonable? And I'm hearing different things here, that we want a paid fire chief, but we're behind in the billing because it's very time consuming. So I guess my question to you, Jeff, is on the average ambulance run, you have a amount of materials that you use, and you have a amount for your equipment and your personnel. So you keep track of those things, however you do. And then you sit down and basically write a report that's sent to each, or to Springfield, is that how that works?
Sort of. There's a few things, and I'm glad you asked that question because it'll help me answer for everybody here, understand where we were at and where we're going right now. Everybody knows the last 3 years, we've been really busy, fire department. We built a fire station, we spec'd and built out a new fire engine, we had to train 12 new volunteers, and then we had the radio grant. All that took up a lot of valuable time. During that time, hours were reduced, which made it very difficult to stay up on a lot of the paperwork. Some of the things that we did to offset that was by utilizing volunteer paramedics. One of or using not just volunteer paramedics, but volunteers in general to go on medical calls. The thing that takes the most time with the bills is when the volunteers do the hospital charts. A lot of times there's things that are left out. I mean, they're volunteers. I can't expect them to dot all the i's and cross the t's. But in order to get the chart prepared to submit it to the billing company, there's a lot of time that's spent going back and looking at call times, looking at mileages for the ambulances because somebody forgot to check a box and now I gotta enter the mileage in. And if those things don't happen, the billing company kicks the bill back. So then it just takes even longer. Now, having said that, we don't have any more big projects in our future, thank God. So I'm tired. And as a result of that, I think that the time management for being able to get to these, get to the billing is gonna be a lot more acceptable. In addition to the fact that we lost one of our volunteer paramedics. And that has kind of made my job easier in terms of making sure that all the stuff gets done. So hopefully I've answered your question in terms of, yes, I think we will be able to stay on top of it. Prior to the fire station and all that stuff, we were able to keep up on it. We were able to keep up on it, no problem.
Thank you, Jeff. I think the committee now needs to discuss a few things, but okay.
Yeah.
Were you done?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I think my point was that, compared to the long history of the department, there are some things that a fire chief was responsible for. And of course, these were volunteer chiefs, and it's a different game now, and I understand that. But if we talked about level of service, and I think the council needs to decide what the level of service is. The budget committee can talk about the dollars, but I think there needs to be a definite change of what our level of service expectations are. And one of the things that I think the council should discuss is what their expectations of a paid chief is, and what their expectations of the city manager or city administrator, depending on who you end up hiring. And so, if you're gonna have a high level of service for a fire chief, then look for ways to maybe delegate some of those duties a little bit better.
Anything else, Don?
Jeff, I think, it's been probably 6 or 8 months ago, you said, I think to council that possibly we will be looking for a new ambulance fairly soon. Now, how soon? Because I don't see any way in the near future we're going to afford a new ambulance. What's the outlook on the new ambulance look?
Well, I was asked to bring a balanced budget to the budget committee, and I guess that's just one of the things that we have to overlook this next fiscal year because there's no money. But absolutely, that's in the future. When that ambulance dies, that's something that the council's going to have to look at.
Guidance.
I have one other question. Communications, emergency communications, have we received monies from Hood River Scepter for the 911?
I'm hopefully going to have that resolved by Friday. I'm going to be meeting with the 911 communication commander to make sure that everything that they were requesting is taken care of.
And that's how much money?
$38,000.
And it's the only one outstanding?
Yes, ma'am.
Tiffany?
Okay, on your materials and services, it seems, when you were talking about the Springfield billing, that according to this paperwork, at the end of January, you were already at $2,500. But I see that that's gone down to $4,000 for this next year, which really at $38 is 105 billings. Is that an accurate, is that an accurate amount? To me, that seems a little under.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, sometimes you have lean years and sometimes you have busy years. If we have a busy year and all of a sudden we're transporting 200 people, I mean, I can't predict when we have the calls, but my by golly, if we have 200 calls and we're able to bill for that, we're gonna bill for that. All that means is that I can't spend somewhere else.
And then above that, you have for contract services miscellaneous, huge jump this year, compared to what you had budgeted. You don't anticipate that same amount this year? I mean, you had last year $750 budgeted in it. This year, and through January, you were at $1,856. Do you not anticipate, and again, I see it's $750 for this year, so.
Yeah, the contract services for this fiscal year, that was an unanticipated cost associated with the radio grant. We ended up having to hire an engineer at the last minute. We didn't think we had to, and we were able to get a really good deal on an engineer. But yeah, that's what that expense was. We had to show it.
Okay, and then, you don't have any reimbursable replacement costs for this year? Is there no anticipated?
The reimbursable replacement costs, that line item was put in there just to show when we lose equipment on incidents. So, we don't budget for it because we're actually getting that money reimbursed. For example, if we're out on the freeway and we burn up a hose, we bill them for the hose, but I don't wanna charge it back to something else, to another line item in the budget. I wanna be able to go back and show council and say, yep, we lost $2,500 worth of equipment this year, but it's gonna get paid back through the ambulance bills.
And just a couple more questions here. On the annual hose ladder testing, already, at the first of the year, you were at $5,000, and that's just a once-a-year thing, or a couple times a year thing? What is that?
It's annually. Every year we have to do hose testing.
Okay. It says annual, sorry. So you're anticipating those costs are gonna go down?
Yes, because last year we found out that we don't have to test wildland hose anymore, because 9 times out of 10, when the section of hose blows, you just throw it away and you buy another one. So instead of testing that, which, they charge you for every hose that you test, we're gonna save, about $1,000 by not having to test 5,000 feet of wildland hose.
And then below that, you have scuba hydro testing every 5 years, OSHA requirement. Should that not be a cost that's spread out over the 5 years, so that for the 5 years until you do that, you build up that?
We just did the hydro testing, and yes, it would be good to do that, but I'm not gonna add that into the budget for another 2 years, because, again, all our bottles, we have, I'd say, 80% of our bottles, or 90% of our bottles, all have to be hydro tested at one time. So, to budget money in there right now doesn't make any sense, because we literally just did hydro testing. So, yeah, we would show money there, but, we wouldn't be spending it. So, if we're trying to cut expenses, I just figured it didn't make sense to put it there.
Okay, and then on the awards, wasn't that something that usually the volunteer association paid for, or was that something that always the fire department paid for?
The fire department historically has paid for that. And what that is, the city is doing a thank you to the volunteers for their service. And it's, things like firefighter of the year, EMT of the year, those kind of awards. And generally what we're giving them is plaques. It's not cash or, a weekend at a hotel or anything like that.
Shauna?
Chief Pritchard, you have come to council and tried to work with your city administrator in the past to seek other revenue sources that exist out there. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
What have you done exactly? Tell me exactly what you have tried to seek in revenue sources. What have you done?
Well, I think there was a couple proposals that were pitched to council.
I think that this is really off the point. I'd like to keep this on the budget, and hearing the historical facts about what Jeff has proposed. These decisions have been made by council, and this is about this budget.
You just said, are there any ideas out there?
There's nothing, okay, but I don't think we need to go through an historical account of the proposals that have been proposed and turned down, or proposed and accepted by city council.
I'd like to just finish what I was saying. I do believe Chief Pritchard has put forth ideas in the past in seeking additional revenues to aid in this fund. That is what I wanted to
It's not
establish.
gonna help with this this year. Those decisions have not been made to lay this foundation in order to have those
I'm done.
proposals
You
be
can finish
enacted.
too.
Anybody else? Lance?
Well, just along with what Sean is saying, I thought that a good source of revenue that we had last year was the paid on-call paramedic position, and we've, we've established that does make money, and that's another source of revenue that could be considered. So I think I think that's, if you talk about historically, there's another source of revenue.
Tiffany?
Again, that's not a budget issue, that's a council issue.
And I don't believe it's been historically established that it made money. I think that this budget and how much of the year.
Maybe you didn't look at the stuff the council did.
Yes, I did, I watched it.
Okay.
And this budget reflects how successful it was. Partially. Tom?
Just a question on the ability to get the 126. That's what we're counting on as money coming on in. And we took the 126 from historical information. But part of that historical information was what we did in the past with 2 paramedics there and overtime of the chief. So if we're not gonna get the overtime of the chief and we don't have the paramedics there, are we gonna be able to obtain that 120, or are we gonna be able to obtain that 126?
That's a good question. I hadn't really factored that into it. I just looked at the history of it and thought we were budgeting too high, which would set us up for the same situation we're in now. But I can't answer that question.
Well, and I believe your numbers are probably, I believe the 126 is more in keeping with what was closer to what was coming in.
I think that's a good,
But
that's a
it was
good
coming
question.
in because we had overtime and more people out there.
I mean, that's a good question for
Come
Jeff.
on.
Bobby?
I had a question, maybe I missed a council meeting or something, but I heard the chief say that we lost one of the paid EMTs.
We lost one of our volunteers, Carl Zerfing, went
Okay.
back to Afghanistan.
Okay, thank you.
George?
Tom, at break, we can go in and take the last 3 years' audits and bring the numbers out. That's real easy. So we can do that at break time.
Well, he's already,
Yeah,
So
he gave that to us.
yeah,
Yeah,
We've got it in the report already.
Oh, is it?
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Three
the term
years.
was
yeah. The question is,
117 and 91, that was.
the question is, will these revenues change because the circumstances have changed?
The variable.
Yeah, that's the
The
part.
equation will change.
So,
It
Jeff,
seems to me that it would be lower.
do you think it's gonna go lower than this, given your current staffing?
I don't believe so,
Without you going in overtime.
without
And
any
your,
overtime.
and your volunteers. Now, how many do you have right now? So now you just got one volunteer EMT, or you got,
No, we've
I
got
mean, paramedic, not
75% of
paramedic.
our department is
Is
EMTs, I'm
EMT,
very
cool.
proud to say.
so, but in paramedic you have?
We have one other paramedic, and we also have an intermediate, which is almost a paramedic, but there's certain things that they can't do.
Okay.
I see in this budget is what I see is the fire chief's position being funded and no other possibilities, with no overtime, with no other possibilities of taking overtime from any other. I mean, you can only switch around within personnel, correct? You can't take from materials and services to pay overtime? Can you do that legally?
We just don't pay overtime.
Well, you're gonna have to pay it eventually if overtime is made,
But as of right now, no overtime is allowed.
which brings me to something that when I was looking over this budget, and I didn't see your new budget, but I noticed it in the old one, I'm concerned about contract service attorney, because I think with a lot of the threats that have been made and a lot of the rhetoric that's been going on in this community, and from some of our volunteers and employees, that this department is gonna require a lot more than $1,000 in attorney fees. So I'd like to see that budgeted much higher. Anything Anything else for Jeff? Do you have any comments on what you have heard here, that without being real long, because we're pushing the clock?
Sure. On that last notion, we can try and increase the line item for the attorney, but what would you like to cut?
Well, I think that's what we're all sitting here having to face, and I don't think it's a pleasant task, Jeff. You know, that's what I'll say to that. What do you want to cut? What can you cut? Do you have a suggestion about any more cuts on your already cut budget?
I will take some time and go through this. The
Okay.
only other comment I have is, I think, and I could be wrong, in terms of the beginning balance that the discussion that was happening earlier, it talks about the city budget as a whole. It doesn't specifically talk about individual budgets within the whole city budget. So if there is no beginning balance, and again, I could be wrong, if there is no beginning balance, if there's no money in the city coffers at all, then obviously you can't spend money. But if there is money in the city coffers, then even though this budget doesn't have a beginning balance, it's not like the city is doing anything illegal. And again, like I said, this is something that was explained to me by somebody else, so I could be wrong, but.
It would have to be in the form of a transfer resolution made by city council. It's not something that could be done, you know, by the budget office, by the finance officer. You can't move from fund to fund unless it's budgeted to do so without that. And also, like I said before, and I think that this is a really valuable point, is that you're supposed to project what monies are going to come in this year and which of your billings you're not going to collect for this year. And those billings that you know there's a good chance that you're not going to get in for this year, you can't count those for this year's revenue. You can count maybe on some balance, your own spreadsheets you can, but as for your city budget, that has to be the beginning balance for your next year, your anticipated revenues that have not come in yet.
Absolutely.
And that hasn't been done. So that's a real problem, because it's almost a third, you know, in some cases, of what's come in already, or what's gonna come in for the whole year that has been spent before it's in, which would be and should be your beginning balance for next year. Okay, yeah, why don't we all take a break now, okay? 10-minute break. Thank you. Therapy doesn't mind staying.
One quick thing?
Yes.
please. Jeff, in your memorandum, you talked about uniforms for the volunteers. Okay, is a uniform the shirt and the pants, or is it just the shirt, or is it a jacket? Or?
It's a combination of the pants, which are Nomex, which double not only as a duty uniform, but also as personal protective equipment for fires. And then we have a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, and then a rain jacket. That's the uniform.
And that's the blue ones that everybody sees with the logo on it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So that's reflected in this
Yes.
amount. Okay. Thanks.
Now, we can go through and address the line items as a budget committee, or we can get to the heart of the problem. Is it going to do us any good to address the line items? How much money are we gonna be able to come with, even with draconian cuts? And will it be enough? And where does the budget committee wanna go with this conversation? Any comments? Yes.
I really don't see the point of going through the line items. You've asked a lot of questions, I'm not sure how much you can cut here. So I think it might be better to move on to with the next.
Okay, I do-
Unless somebody has a great suggestion that they thought of in the last 10 minutes.
Well, I do see some line items that I would choose to reduce.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, in terms of, it's probably, if, you know, if there's, if you're gonna talk about cuts, it'd be best to talk about a general number and let myself and Jeff work the line items.
Kevin?
Okay, so we've talked about a general number of between $60,000 and $90,000. Where are we gonna come up with that?
Well, let me do this in two pieces. Number one is, like I said, we reduced the fund budget by 30%. So my expectation is that this is not gonna happen next year. And if we got some quality control in terms
It's
of,
not gonna happen.
we're not gonna run a deficit.
Okay, but I'm talking about our current deficit.
I understand, I just want to make sure that, you know, we did think about that. I was, you know, and what I was told by the auditor is, we can't end on a deficit, we'll have to make an interfund loan, and the question then is, we'll develop an estimate of what the fund loan will be, and then the question is, how do you pay for it? Do you want this fund to pay for it one time next year? Do you want this fund to pay for it over 10 years like the other loans? No, I'm not telling you what you should do, I'm just telling you what the question is.
Well, I don't see how that's even a question, because if it's an extended loan, then we're allowing a department head to set his own budget. Because when you spend more than what you have in your budget, and then take out a loan to pay it back without council authority, you've misappropriated funds. I mean, it's pretty simple. When you have a set budget and you overspend it, you're using someone else's money that you have not had appropriated to you. This fund is responsible for this money. This money was spent by this department. It wasn't spent by anybody else but this department. It has to pay it back. It's plain and simple.
And
You
I
don't have
understand
the
that.
option either of taking out an operational loan for 10 years. It has to be paid back either the year it's taken or budgeted for a maximum of 5 years. So those are the options for an operational loan.
Okay. 1 to 5.
But if you're gonna take out one every year for 1 to 5?
Well, and that's what I was saying is, by dropping the fund revenues and expenditures by 30%, or over $100,000, that I don't expect it to go into deficit again, and if there was, you know, if we do a better job of monitoring the spending, it won't get there again.
Well, it seems that people don't understand the rules, that you don't spend money that hasn't come in yet, and as long as that situation prevails, we're gonna have the same problems.
Agreed.
George?
Well, the thing that I was gonna say is if the budget's gonna get hit again next year for the interest and the payments on the loan that isn't even addressed in the budget. In addition
Well,
to.
it has to be budgeted. If you're anticipating doing this, you have to budget for it.
Correct.
Right.
You have to budget for its
Correct.
payback.
But what I'm saying is that's gonna put an additional load on their budget, and it's already being cut to 30%. So,
Because there's no, if this is your remedy for the negative, then it has to be addressed in this next budget. If the remedy to fix the negative is to borrow, that has to be reflected. That's what you're gonna do, and shown how you're, have the ability to be able to pay it back.
And and I agree, and the question is, how does the budget committee want to do that?
I got a question of Jeff.
Go ahead.
Training, we were looking at making money on training, and I have seen groups of people here from time to time over the years training. Have we been making some revenue off of the tower? Have we been making revenue off of wildland firefighting classes, or, yeah? I don't see that anywhere, but have we been
the classes that you've seen have been through agreements that we've had with other agencies. So they're coming in, using our facility, we get to put our firefighters in there at no cost. So, no, we have not been charging because we have not been able to host our own
What do we get?
classes.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. What do we get in return for this?
Participation.
Oh, let's say the Forest Service comes to put on a class. Class costs $400, $500 per student. We get to put our students in the class at no cost, and they get to use our space. And it actually ends up being to our benefit, because if you look at how much it costs per class and how much you would rent out a facility, we're actually making we're doing a lot better than we would if we had to send people out. But yeah, we've got plans. We'd have to come up with a rate, and right now, if we come up with a rate, we'd have to put that before voters to make sure they approve the rate that we would charge out for training for the facility and whatnot.
Okay, but so right now then, all the training we're seeing, where we see groups of people show up here, is in conjunction with the Forest Service, and they're putting it on.
Forest Service, and then of course the Fire Academy. And we're one of every agency in the county participates in the academy for the Firefighter One program. So we teach the wildland portion, our guys go to another agency and they learn how to cut holes in roofs. So it's a share.
Oh, okay, and that's a countywide
Yes.
thing.
Yeah.
Our ex-city administrator made a public comment that a lot of training was being done by you because you were capable of training when other fire chiefs maybe are not, and that we have such wonderful facilities and nice equipment that people like to come here. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but when you're training like on a 2-day session like you had a couple of weekends ago, we're paying you for that, correct?
Nope,
Is that a volunteer effort?
nope, I'm flexing my schedule. So I guess technically
So
you are
we're
paying.
paying you for it. Yeah, that's a time that you're not responding to, or not in the fire hall during the week, correct?
True, but part of my job is training. We have to train our volunteers. So, yeah, other people are getting benefits from my training, but, I'm training our people too. It's not like I'm just putting on a class for everybody but our fire department.
Well, I'm not sure how equitable it's been. Any other questions for Jeff?
Jim, do you track these events, like you're teaching and what you feel it is to the department? So that, do you track like the other departments? Do you track on this?
Yeah, everybody who's in our class, we have to keep training records on. So, yes, we do keep records of the classes that we teach.
So are you looking at it like an investment, like you looking at it like, okay, the city paid me in my wage today, or 2 days or whatever, $80. How much benefit did the city get for that investment?
Oh, it's huge. Most of these classes are $200 or $300. So if we send 4 students out at, $300 a pop, and it costs the city, let's say $124 over 2 days or 3 days to teach the class, or let's say $250 or something like that for teaching 2 days. You're seeing hundreds of dollars in savings that we're not having to pay out to somebody else to train our people.
Okay, and you have these things in writing, like, do you keep a tracking record? Like, we were asking other departments that they do these things.
I guess I could do that report. It's another report that,
So you don't keep a track per se, it's just kind of like on the processing.
sure.
Is that the same with when you're able to bill, you can't necessarily keep a log, so to speak, you just kind of have a fair assessment of how you're able to?
I'm not following that question.
Billing, you said you're able to do it per, time around, I believe.
That's
Like, you
correct.
can't necessarily do it weekly, you might do it, and I'm just asking you to do it.
But when I do billing, well, there is a log because everything gets sent to Springfield.
So there's a record, a tracking record of,
Yes.
That's what we're trying to get the numbers on.
Lance?
Question for Mr. Carson. So you're saying that at the end of this fiscal year, you're anticipating a deficit in this fund?
Yes.
And what we're trying to address then is taking a loan and paying that loan back.
Yes.
What are our options again? What are you're
That's-
saying reduce, let's say, we think it's 20,000, you're saying one option is to reduce the expenses out of this fund by 20,000, or are you talking about also
Give it,
paying out of the general fund?
It has-
What are-
okay.
What are those options? Because
it has to be
we're talking
paid,
about travel and.
It has to be
and the
paid-
training, and it's not really getting us anywhere, so.
it has to be paid this year, okay? It can't be paid next year.
But what are our options for paying it, is what I'm trying to get at.
You have to do a loan, an interfund loan.
And
how
paying back that loan is what we're talking about.
Exactly, and you could pay it back in 1 year, anything up to 5 years. And you could pay it back out of this loan, and, out of this fund and budget it as an expenditure, or you could pay it out of the general fund or something else. But that's where we are.
It has to be budgeted somewhere.
So, I didn't see a proposal for that, maybe I just missed it. What are you proposing?
I don't have a proposal for it because it was something that I thought the budget committee should talk about.
Yeah, and I'm glad you just said that, I think we should talk about it.
Shauna, did you have something?
I don't think that is what we were doing, I think we were talking about trainings.
Well, we're asking questions.
Right, but if the point is to get to solving the budget, then let's stay on topic.
I think that we are on topic, Lance, and I think
I think
most
we
of
are
the
now,
committee
good.
thinks there.
Let's stay on it.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Don
Don?
has a question.
I don't know how we can come to a decision on paying a loan back if we don't know what the loan is. What are we gonna decide we can do?
Rich,
Should we just all guess and pick a number and whoever wins?
we make our best estimate.
We're going to give you, I will give you our best estimate Friday, based on what the receipts look like in terms of Springfield, and which is the only unknown at this point.
We know how many checks we've written? Do we know that now?
I think, yeah, we can put that together.
And how much salary is due before the end of the year, et
Right,
cetera.
right.
I don't know how we can come to
So I will-
any
I
decision
will-
until we know this,
I'll-
personally.
I need to give you a number, so however you address this, you can plug it into the budget, and I don't have it.
Okay.
Yes.
Shauna?
There was talk about just doing away with the fire chief, paid fire chief position, and it's not something I've researched, but I think there are people in the room that have researched it, and if you have any ideas for further reducing expenses, and if you have those ideas or researched it, I'd kind of be curious to hear what people are having to say.
What do you mean, the public, or you mean committee members?
No, people in here, because there was just talk of possibly just getting rid of a fire chief position. It's not something I've researched, but if there's people that have ideas surrounding that, I'd like them to put that forth.
Tom, did you have something to say?
I just, was curious, if we went $30,000 a hole, it's because we owed somebody some money somewhere, or whatever we're the hole. We paid them, how do we pay them? Who paid for who paid the $30,000? Come out of general fund, did it come out of,
Probably,
somebody must have paid something.
I would say it probably came out of the general fund.
So it came
That's
out, so
really the-
general fund has
that's-
been backfilling the losses. And on the same thing, the training, and that's, I guess, as far as talking on the training, I looked through the 9 and 10 year 9 and 10 receipts, and it shows in here that we had, in actuals, $7,600 in training, and maybe it's in different things. The only checks that I saw that went out to training was about $500. Was one at 12, and one at Hood River, about $500 altogether for that. And, if we're looking at hardball cuts in here, training, because we do have Jeff, and because of his skills, I'm saying we had a tough year. It's a tough year that the training comes from you instead of sending everybody out for training for a year. And the same thing in uniforms. I don't know how much you've covered in uniforms as far as your people goes, but when you look at just the 1 year budget of 910, not 1 year budget, the 1 year bills, there's quite a bit in there for, just in that 1 year that you put into uniforms. So I can only assume that we're not in too bad a shape here, uniforms, that a lot of these people have, have uniforms, and maybe we can cut the uniform out, I don't know. That was just in 1 year, I don't know if we've got it in extra years or not.
Well, to address the uniform thing, I did cut the uniform. I don't know if you noticed it.
Well, I mean, when I'm saying cut, I'm saying eliminate. If everybody's in decent shape, I'm just saying, things are tough. I mean,
Sure. The problem is when you have volunteers come in, we need to be able to outfit them, and to completely eliminate it, I mean, it's just not something that would make sense. In terms of the training line item also takes care of recertification costs. So when we pay for recertification for the EMTs and for certain fire certifications, that money comes out of that, because it is part of training to maintain those certifications.
Oh, okay.
So that's why there's a disparity.
Could you tell me why the radio's maintenance and replacement is, I kind of read in the paper that everybody just got new radios. Are those a different kind of radios?
Again, we have to budget for unforeseen costs. I mean, volunteers are really hard on handheld radios and on pagers. And when they break, a pager's $500 a piece. Handheld radio is close to $1,000, and depending on which radio gets broken, if it's one of the 800s, you're looking at $2,500 just to replace one radio. So yes, we did replace mobile radios, but we did not replace portable radios. And while we do have new pagers, again, we have to make sure that we're taking into account if something breaks. So.
Shauna?
Mr. Carson, with taking money out of the general fund, I was just curious if you know anything about how Hood River works with their fire EMS. Don't they take money out of their general fund to specifically give, they have an allotment to give to their fire EMS for its services?
I don't know about Hood River. I mean, we basically have in the past had a formula where 45% of the general fund was going into EMS. In this particular budget, it's more like 30 is going into EMS. It's not quite that high. But I don't know about Hood River, or for that matter, Stevenson or anybody else.
Okay, so it's probably not I don't think it's terribly unusual for money to come out of the general fund to pay for the fire EMS.
Yeah, I don't think where you have a fire department in a city, not a district, then yeah, it's not unusual. The level of support that's given, I don't have any idea how if you compare this to other similar sized cities, I have no idea what the level of support would be.
I think that it would be wise to remember that there are about $50,000 being contributed in the way of new loans this year for the fire department, for this department. So it's not like the contribution by the city hasn't been up substantially. It's been up more than 50%. And the general fund only has so much money. Anybody else? Lance?
As far as moving forward, I like the idea of going back and looking at some of the line items, but again, I agree with you, Mr. Carson, it's a good idea for you and Jeff to do. And I also like the idea of considering using the general fund for the discrepancies that we just discussed. So you said you came looking, see what ideas you came from the budget committee, and I think those are two good ways for the, get back to you for Friday.
George?
I just like to point out that if we have to take out, if the council approved taking out a loan to eliminate the $60,000 cash balance, that if they did it on 5 years, which is 60 months, that's $1,000 a month.
12,000 bucks.
Huh?
Yeah, 12,000 bucks a year.
12,000 bucks a year at no interest. That's a pretty simple one to figure out. And that doesn't even account for whatever money has to be borrowed from whatever fund so that it can operate until monies come in.
And also, Rich, you presented us a balanced general fund with the repayment of these loans included, correct?
Correct.
And, would another, I mean, how much weight can, and also, since we just got these, I didn't have a chance to go over them yet.
Yes. Are other things reflected in the general fund, like the revenues we asked about on the modular and for the fire truck? I don't think the sale of the modular is included in the general fund budget, even though there is somebody interested in buying it.
It is.
And the fire station, we don't have anything.
Well, that needs to be included in the budget somewhere, and that's a revenue.
Well, we don't plan on selling the fire station, so there is no
No,
revenue.
but the potential sale of the modular,
Yes, we can put that in.
that needs to be put in.
Sure.
And the potential sale of the old fire truck,
Sure.
that as well,
That, I mean, those are
needs to be
basically,
put in.
that's basically a pass-through. If we sell it, we expend it, so that's fine.
How is that a pass-through? It would be a revenue that's not reflected in this budget.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay, you're right. We would just
We're
stick.
gonna sell the
well, by
modular, we need to reflect the revenue.
By pass-through, what I meant was, your revenue and expenditures have to balance, so I would put the money as a revenue and put it in contingency, so it
Correct.
balanced the budget. That's what I meant by
Oh,
pass-through.
okay. In case we
We can put,
didn't get it.
yeah, we can put both of those in there.
And not budget against the money if, unless we're sure, which we aren't. Anybody else? Hi, Eva. George, do you have any comments? See you shaking your head.
No, I don't have any comments, I just,
Any suggestions on what we should do with this right now? Should we defer it again to Rich? We're getting right down there. Darlene?
I'd like to see these OIB loans put back in to the fire fund, to expenses of the fire department, I'd like to have those put back in. Especially if we're gonna look at, and I'm totally against another loan to bail them out. But at least keep those in there, don't take those out too.
Had those had never been in here in the past, correct?
It's in the budget that was presented to us, the OIB
It's in the
loans.
general fund for the OIB loan. It's not in the fire department fund, and it hasn't been
And
since day
historically,
one.
it has never been.
No,
It's in the budget.
in the general fund.
In the general fund, on page 3. On page 3 of the.
I'm looking at page 16.
That's the loan, and we transfer it from the general fund to the loan fund to pay the loan. It comes out of the general fund.
They had budgeted for interest on, Rich did, not knowing, not having met with the committee yet, budgeted originally for both interest on both of those loans, on both the fire engine and the fire station.
There was interest only, and the council decided to make principal and interest payments, and so it changed.
Correct. But I personally don't understand why the fire truck was removed from that fund. That needs to stay in the fire department as far as I'm concerned. So,
So is that council then that does that?
huh?
Would that be council that would do that?
Designate where it's going to be paid back? I don't think that they need to do that. I don't know, what do you think?
Is that budget?
I think the budget committee can make
Yeah.
that recommendation.
Mhm.
And I'd like to see that put in there and then reduce that 12.7.
I'll take a consensus on putting the loan for the fire truck, which is not the significant one at all, and that is fire equipment, and it should be paid for out of the fire department. Whether it means offsetting it in another way or not, but it needs to be reflected in that fund. And everybody in favor of reflecting the fire truck in the emergency services fund, please say aye.
I have a question.
Oh, question?
My question is the, I forgot my question, never mind.
Okay.
Question.
Don,
We're talking about 24,280.
we're talking about the payment.
But is it-
That's what the payment is for the annual payment.
The annual payment.
The annual payment on, the loan, no, it's not that much.
So you're talking
Loan
about-
To the capital,
I see your council.
You're talking about just the fire
Council
truck?
the fire truck.
Okay.
It's
Got it.
$2,459.
Yeah, all right.
And I remember, so the council didn't make a resolution or whatever that, general fund is gonna pay that one? I thought general fund was paying that.
Not the
Am I
fire
wrong?
truck.
Not the fire truck, okay. Thank you.
Okay, everybody in favor of this loan being paid, serviced out of the fire, yeah, Tom?
I don't, what did we do on our thing, because it was,
It just
Well,
says
I don't
payment
know.
from the city.
what's
It
that?
just- It just
Hasn't
doesn't
been
say,
finalized
it
yet.
doesn't say where the money's
That's not
coming from.
finalized.
We were gonna start
Pay
getting
it.
paid.
Right, it's $24,280
That's what I
for
thought.
the resolution.
Everybody in favor of this loan being serviced, the loan for the fire truck, not the firehouse, the fire truck, being serviced out of the fire department, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Opposed.
One opposed?
Jackie, what page are you seeing that 200 or 2,450?
Where did I find that? I looked in the general fund at how much had been budgeted for that payment. It was $2,459.
It's on page three
Thank you.
of the new,
Was it a
Last
consensus? It was a consensus, nobody made a motion or a
Oh, it
second.
wasn't a motion?
It was a
Oh,
consensus,
oh, it was
so
just a
the
consensus.
consensus passes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So, that 2,000, that needs to be transferred to the fire department, that loan, and taken out of the general fund.
What was that, $220 a month?
And
$309 a month. $309.86 a month.
And I, on the other one, the city has accepted, the total responsibility for that outside of the firehouse, outside of the EMS budget, or emergency services budget. But I would like to point out that there were numerous monies spent on extras within that fire department budget. And so it isn't all just for a firehouse. It was the firehouse plus equipment, plus furniture, plus a lot of other things. So none of this is being charged directly out of their budget. Okay, now the next step, I guess, is to address, were we going to give this to Rich to come back to address how we could approach the loan that this department's going to have to take out before the end of the year, and how it could be paid back? Was that the idea, is to have him present that on Friday? I'm a little bit concerned about that, I mean, more than a little bit concerned. We have a Friday meeting, and then we have a Wednesday meeting that's scheduled as is. And we have to schedule the public's portion to comment, which needs to be done on Wednesday. It'd be nice if we all had everything done except a few housekeeping items before the public gave their presentations, so we could take the ideas and make the tweaks without a lot of confusion if the public offers us ideas specific to these budgets. And I would like to clarify in just a second that when we accept public comment, which will be on Wednesday, Wednesday the 15th, that it needs to be limited to the specifics of the budget. We all know how people feel about having the services, but this is not the city council, and it's not the place to make these arguments. the arguments and the commentation taken on Wednesday need to involve the budget problems, the monetary problems, and how they could be solved. And please keep in mind that there are funds that we aren't working with. We can't take out of our utilities to fund the general fund or the EMS. We have to stick to the general fund and the EMS. And I think we should decide what time that would be good. I'd like to allow a little bit of time before we accept the commentary to do a few housekeeping things if necessary. Are there any comments about that? Is Wednesday at 7:30 acceptable with everybody? Everybody in favor of that time for, yes, Eva?
I have to work until 8 on that night, so.
It'll be going on
Yeah.
longer than that, I'm sure, because we won't set it, my idea is to set it at 7:30, so we have an hour to try to pick up and make it more understandable for people. And so, could I have a consensus that the public commentary be accepted on Wednesday night, the 15th, starting at 7:30? Everybody in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, then that was done as consensus. I don't think we need a motion, do we? On that? Okay. Richard?
If you ask me to deal with this, I can tell you right now what I will do.
You can say that again, please?
I'll tell you right now what I would do,
Okay.
okay? I'll determine what the shortfall is, put together a 5-year loan from a fund that actually has money, and then the only question left, and let's say at the high end, it's probably gonna be $12,000 a year, then the only question left is, does it come out of the general fund, or does it come out of this fund?
Anybody have any comments about that? Darlene?
Say it comes out of this fund. Sure, you're gonna work out a loan for misappropriation of funds because the funds have already been spent. And we know that's a misappropriation. When they're working budget law, you don't spend the money and then transfer and make appropriations to pay for it, which I don't know, I just don't agree with that at all. I don't agree with a loan for it.
I'm just telling you what the auditor told me.
I think that the general fund has already been overwhelmed by the actions and purchasing done by this department. And I can't accept any more weight. Could I have a consensus to take this out of,
Madam Chair,
yes, Lance?
I say, look at a combination of general fund as well as this fund. I think it seems like we just, had a consensus to make this imbalance again by putting the loan payments back in this fund. So, I mean, I think that has to be addressed too. Maybe I misunderstood that, but I'm saying look at a combination of those.
This wasn't a balanced fund before we started doing things to it. This was outstanding always.
Mr. Carson, you didn't give us a balanced budget tonight on this one?
Yeah, it's balanced.
It was balanced tonight,
It was,
beginning of the meeting?
but
$60,000.
But there, but the question of the deficit was what was there, and that's really what this whole discussion is about tonight, is dealing with the deficit to keep it balanced. I'm not saying there wasn't a deficit, I'm saying that was a question I needed the budget committee to answer, because that's your job.
And then you just asked what, does
Yeah.
it come out of general fund or does it come out of this fund? Darlene says this fund, and I've said combination.
Kevin?
Well, I don't see, I think council has to take action on a loan, right?
Yes.
So there's not gonna be anything to consider Friday on this particular thing.
Well, we anticipate it, we have to show it in the budget. It doesn't matter whether the council's done it or not, the negative is obvious. Guida?
Well, and then, Mr. Carson, you're gonna bring also the payments that have been made, and we're gonna have an up-to-date on that.
Yeah, we'll start with what the potential deficit is,
Right.
our best guess, and then, amortize that out over 5 years, and it's either gonna be paid for by the general fund or by the fire fund.
Okay, but included in this report, you will bring up to date the checks that have been written within the last 2, 3 months, et cetera, whatever, that
In terms of-
doesn't reflect here, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
We still haven't answered our city administrator's question about which fund is this debt going to be burdened with? And which fund is going to be burdened by this debt? And I've given my opinion. My opinion is that our general fund has already been burdened by a tremendous amount of debt, and we can't afford to take any more out of it. Yes.
Sandra, I move that we direct Richard to check with the state budget law and find out if this loan that we're talking about doing, because this department had run into the negative, that what budget law requires to be done, okay? Because I would think that our bottom line is we're trying to follow by budget law, and right now, we're being hypothetical because I don't think anybody actually knows.
Not until we know if there's a negative balance at the end of the year.
Well, we can anticipate there's going to be a negative balance.
And if you
And what
anticipate
happens that we're anticipating that there's a negative balance? Does that mean that the department that has a negative balances has to be responsible for that balance according to Oregon budget law? That's my question.
I don't think it says that. I think that.
Well, I want to know for sure.
Okay, sure. I can
That's what I'm
understand that. Okay. So let's talk practicality then.
I'll second the motion.
Was that a motion? We've been working on
You just said,
consensus.
It was a motion.
Okay.
I think that makes it a motion discussion.
Discussion? Darlene?
I think that this department had seen this, knew this budget, knew his budget, and overexpended, and therefore we keep those expenses in this fund. Okay, it wasn't just the department head, somebody else, staff writes checks. There needs to be, at some point, someone's gotta be financially accountable for the overexpenditures. When I was on tourism committee and we had a bill to pay, we would have to bring in our minutes of our meeting, we voted, and the line item that was coming through, and I had to show that there was money in that fund. So when did that stop? If there's an expense, and the department head is responsible for his budget and the expenses in his budget, and it states that in his website, okay? He should come in with his bill and present it to the finance officer, whoever, and they should look and see, is there money in there or is there not money in there? I don't care about projected money because we've seen a history of over-projected revenues not coming in. This has got to be stopped. This can't go on and on and on. There's got to be some kind of checks and balances where before a bill comes in or before a bill is even incurred, see that there's money there. Don't repair the command vehicle until, use the OEO car or the city car or the brush rig until revenues are there to pay the bill. Okay, this department knew what its finances were and they overexpended. Now we're gonna continually hit utilities, let's borrow from the utilities again. Okay, and let's do it again next year because it's gonna do the same thing next year.
I
Okay.
agree.
I want to revise my motion.
Thank you.
I want my motion to be revised to find out what Darlene was just saying is if in fact that what's been going on is wrong, if we can in fact get a loan to correct that problem, or if there's a law that we're supposed to follow.
I don't understand what you mean by that. That's a hard motion.
How's that different than your other motion?
Well, the thing about it is I don't disagree with Darlene that the the department has overspent its budget, okay? Now, the question kept coming up about a loan and whether or not the loan was going to, I guess, I'll just retract all my motions for right now. They're all retracted.
Okay, I was trying to, at one point, take a consensus that this be serviced out of the fire department, this debt, and not out of the general fund. Everybody in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed, please say aye.
Opposed?
Could we take a roll call, please?
Budget Committee Member George Fisher?
Aye.
Budget Committee Member Laura Fisher?
Aye.
Budget Committee Member Lance Masters?
Opposed?
Budget Committee Member Tiffany Pruitt?
Aye.
Budget Committee Member Tom Crandlett?
Aye.
Budget Committee Member Sandra Kelly?
Aye.
Budget Committee Member Kevin Benson?
Aye.
Budget Committee Member Eva Zerke?
Opposed.
Budget Committee Member Darlene Solinger?
Aye.
Budget Committee Member Shauna Hazel?
Opposed.
Budget Committee Member Karen Syke? Budget Committee Member Guida Haight?
Aye.
Budget Committee Member Bobby Walker?
Aye.
Budget Committee Member Don Haight?
Aye.
10 yeses.
The consensus is passed, that this be paid for by the department that incurred the deficit, whatever it is, and we'll get the figures from that on Friday, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so, like Lance said, I don't know if we're talking about the same thing or not, but I wouldn't mind scrutinizing a few of the line items.
Well, since it's coming out of the department, then I'm gonna have to go back and look at the line item.
Okay,
So what I'll do is come back with a new version of this that balances with the numbers in terms of what we estimate the deficit to be.
something that I'd like you to look at is the awards and the Contract Service Volunteer Association. I think that we should allot something for the volunteers, but it's allotted $3,000 and $600 for awards on top of that. It would seem like that $600 should have come out of that to me. But I'd like to do away with the awards category, that's say $600, and I'd like to reduce the Contract Service Volunteer Association. Now, they reduced from 3,000 to 1,000 the volunteers for the city. It was it 2,000 to 1,000? Well, then that's a mistake because we reduced that. I remember George saying you could make a lot of hamburgers for $1,000.
That was a
That
volunteer.
was, no, it's a whole different.
Oh, government relations, okay. And is that where the volunteers,
That's for the city.
appreciation dinner?
That's for the city appreciation.
That's what I mean. And are the fire volunteers included in that dinner? Usually? They are? Does anybody have any additional line items they'd like to suggest or look at? Yes, Jeff?
If you want to cut that much out of out of those two line items, then I'll voluntarily reduce my salary, but to take a hit like that for the volunteers is probably the worst thing you could ever do.
Well, it's not like I enjoyed suggesting that. I thought that the other volunteers had made sacrifices when it came to their budget, and the fire department could do the same, since it's the fire department's bills that we're trying to service here. Yeah. Rich?
Again, I would just leave it, well, the numbers are what the numbers are, and just leave it to us, and we'll tell you what we
Okay.
think.
Okay.
If you want to change it, change it.
Okay. Bobby?
Well, I was just gonna say, and it's a moot point now, that we're not solving the problem by nickel and diming our volunteers. We're not gonna solve the philosophical problem of what we just told the department, that you were short, now you're gonna pay that back. solve that by taking away a couple appreciation plaques or a barbecue or whatever the chief decides to do. I think it's a bigger issue than that.
Kevin?
And I guess if we're gonna come back with a 5-year amortization of this debt, and where, has that been decided? I certainly don't support 5 years. I think we're taxing future generations for future year budgets for what has already been spent in the past. That's not the way budget usually works. You know, it's gonna go to council on Monday, I'm sure.
It's an expenditure for operations, not for
It's not
anything capital,
Expending money for past operations,
past operations.
you would never be able to get a loan for that from a bank.
Rich?
It won't be on next Monday's agenda, it's already gone out. I mean, I suppose you could revise it. I would suggest that in terms of council, that it be on the budget, on the council meeting on the 27th, where the budget and the council, and all this will come together anyway.
Well, that's my question, is how are you gonna know whether it's gonna be 1 year or 5 years or no loan at all, without it actually being before council and approved?
Well, it's up to the budget committee to make a recommendation to the council. The council can make whatever decision the council wants. I'm just saying that if that's where we are at the moment, is at the budget committee, talking about how to do it.
Darlene?
Can't council make a revised agenda to add this to the agenda so that budget can possibly present a balanced budget?
The budget has a timeline, they should do it first.
We're doing 2 meetings.
I agree with
Yeah.
that.
Can I say the
Budget's doing 2
agenda again?
meetings a week, you can add one more item.
And I wanted to talk to the budget committee about a possible meeting on Tuesday. How does the budget committee feel about that, next Tuesday?
As opposed to having it on Wednesday or in addition?
No, in addition to, we're not going to. We are not going to get through, look, it's 5 to 9, logically speaking. We have one more night, and then we have public commentary and picking up the crumbs. So I would propose that we set and have a meeting on the Tuesday after the Monday council meeting. Could I take a roll call onto, if everybody would be agreeable to that, please? I beg your pardon?
Budget committee member George Fisher?
We're setting Tuesday, a meeting for next Tuesday, and if we don't need it, if we find on Friday we don't need it, we can certainly cancel it.
Aye.
Budget committee member Laura Fisher? Budget committee member Lance Masters?
No.
Budget committee member Tiffany Pruitt?
Yes.
Budget committee member Tom Cramblett?
Aye.
Budget committee member Sandra Kelly?
Aye.
Budget committee member Kevin Benson?
No.
Budget committee member Eva Zerke?
No.
Budget committee member Darlene Solinger?
Aye.
Budget committee member Shauna Hazel?
Opposed.
Budget committee member Karen Syed?
Opposed.
Budget committee member Guy DeHate?
Aye.
Budget committee member Bobby Walker?
Oppose.
Budget committee member Don Hay?
Aye.
8 yeses.
Good, thank you. It's not something I want to do either, but I'm not going to vote for I'm not going to vote personally for a budget that we haven't been able to finish, just to rubber stamp something. I don't see the alternative.
Sorry, I think Budget Master, Lance Masters has something to say.
Lance?
What was the question?
What were you saying?
I think part of the problem is it seems like we sort of bird walk after every vote. We have to have commentary to explain why we voted that way, or then we have to argue about why we didn't vote that way. And a lot of the things we've talked about tonight. And I was just thinking back to, well, what did we do tonight? We created a bigger deficit in a fund that already has one, and we gave Mr. Carson some instructions. by moving the OIB loan into this fund, we increased it. That was just my interpretation, but, I mean, other than those two things,
Did we move?
I'm just, yeah, there was a consensus statement, yeah.
We
And I'm just, I mean, and then we also decided to have another meeting, but other than that, what did we do?
No,
We
we,
put the debt back to where it was incurred. We didn't create the debt. The debt was created for us.
But that,
2.5.
Tiffany?
yeah, 2.5 hours, that's what we accomplished.
we,
However you want, the
Excuse me.
nomenclature is fine. I'm answering your question.
no, you're
You've already-
continuing on like you were
really-
complaining already, okay? The point is, we
Did you want to
didn't,
answer your
Would
question?
you please be quiet, Lance, and let
I'm just gonna
Tiffany
answer
have
her
her
question.
turn?
She's gonna ask a question, then
If you be
have
quiet,
the courtesy to listen to the response if you're gonna ask the question.
okay, the answer is you gave the answer, now you're carrying on, saying what you don't want to happen. The point is we didn't move the OIB loan, we moved the fire truck loan and the deficit loan into the fire department's budget. We didn't move the OIB loans, they're still in the general fund where they were before, as is the fire hall $450,000 loan, so the OIB loan has not been moved, so I don't know what you're talking about.
You missed the whole point. I'd like to respond.
What do we need to set what we're gonna have?
Kevin has made a motion to, well, we will, let's, everything on the agenda and,
Continue the meeting or continue to next time?
to continue the meeting
No, continue to the next.
to the next time.
Fine.
Second.
That's been seconded.
Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
I think we should continue and get some more stuff done.
I agree. Okay, Don, I don't want it back, I got my own.
So.